Family blames poor girl for losing virginity before marriage, unaware the man she had sex with is CEO. She's a disgrace to this family. The words cut through Su Ching like a knife as her own father turned his back on her. Standing before her family, tears streaming down her face, she became the target of their collective shame, all because she had committed the unforgivable sin of losing her virginity before marriage. What her family didn't know was that the father of her child wasn't just any man. He was Ling Xiao Han, the wealthiest CEO in Jiangqin, a man whose power could crush their entire family with a single phone call. As they continued to berate and humiliate her, little did they realize how drastically the scales of power would soon tip, forever changing the dynamics of their relationships. The day Su Ching's life shattered began like any other in Jiangqiang. The morning sun filtered through thin curtains in their modest home, casting strips of light across worn furniture that had witnessed 3 generations of the Su family. She had been preparing rice for breakfast when the first whisper reached her, a hushed conversation between her stepmother and aunt that stopped abruptly when she entered the kitchen. Their eyes followed her with an unfamiliar coldness that made her stomach tighten with apprehension. By midday, whispers had grown into murmurs. Relatives appeared at the door one by one, each arrival more solemn than the last. No explanations were offered, as Su Ching was instructed. The living room, usually reserved for New Year celebrations and rare family gatherings, became filled with tight-lipped relatives, perched on edge of seats, their eyes avoiding hers with practiced precision. "Sit down, Su Ching." Her father's voice cut through the murmurs, silencing the room instantly. There was no warmth in those 3 words. She lowered herself onto the wooden stool in the center of the room, feeling suddenly like a criminal awaiting sentencing. The floorboards creaked beneath her as 20 pairs of eyes fixed upon her face. Through the thin walls came the sounds of neighbors gathering outside, their presence not even disguised as casual visits anymore. "Do you understand why we've gathered today?" Her father's question hung in the air. Before Su Ching could form a response, her aunt interjected, her voice sharp as a blade. "The whole neighborhood knows about your condition. Mrs. Zhang saw you at the clinic yesterday." The aunt's fingers clutched her jade bracelet, a symbol of the connections to higher society she had cultivated through decades of careful social climbing. 30 years I've spent building our family's reputation with the Chens and the Li. 30 years destroyed by one selfish girl. Su Cheng's sister Suzia sat beside their stepmother, her expression a masterpiece of practiced shock that didn't quite reach her eyes. "How could you do this to us?" Suzia asked, her voice trembling with what anyone who didn't know better would mistake for emotion. "Father was going to announce my engagement next month. What family will accept a connection to us now?" Tears began streaming down Su Ching's face, not from shame, as they assumed, but from the weight of their betrayal pressing against her chest. She opened her mouth to explain, but her father raised his hand, silencing her before a single word could escape. "Who is he?" her father demanded, his voice dangerously quiet. When Su Ching hesitated, his composure cracked. "Who is the man who did this to you? Answer me." Su Ching's gaze dropped to the floor. "I can't or won't," her stepmother interjected, years of restrained disdain finally finding an acceptable outlet. "After everything we've done for you since your mother died, this is how you repay our kindness." Through the thin curtains, Su Ching could see neighbors clustered near the windows, their shadows stretching across the garden as they positioned themselves for a better view of her disgrace. Mrs. Lin from the noodle shop wasn't even pretending not to listen, her ear practically pressed against the screen door. The news would spread through every corner of Jiangqiang before sunset, embellished with each telling, her character dissected over dinner tables across the community. "The Yangs have already withdrawn their invitation to next week's banquet," her aunt continued, addressing the room as though Su Ching had become invisible. "Chen Meiling called this morning to ask if the rumors were true. These are connections to the most elite circles in Jiangqiang, connections we will never recover." Su Ching wrapped her arms around herself, trying to make her body smaller as accusations continued to fly from every direction. Her cousin mentioned university scholarships that would now be reconsidered. An uncle lamented business partnerships suddenly in jeopardy. With each new concern, Su Ching was transformed from family member to liability. Her entire existence reduced to the damage her situation might cause to others. "You have brought shame to this family," her father finally said, the words falling like stones. "How could you be so selfish? Did you think it all about anyone but yourself?" That single question, posed without irony by a room full of people thinking only of themselves, nearly broke something vital inside Su Ching. The tears flowing down her cheeks now came from a deeper well of hurt, as she witnessed how quickly parental love transformed into rejection, how family bonds dissolved when measured against societal judgment. "If you would just let me explain," Su Ching began, her voice barely audible. "Explain?" Her stepmother interrupted with a harsh laugh. "What explanation could possibly justify this? Your father built this family's reputation through decades of honest work, and you've destroyed it in one night of indiscretion." And tried again, raising her voice slightly. "Please, if you would just listen." Her father slammed his hand against the table, teacups rattling in their saucers. "Enough. No explanation will undo this disgrace. We must think of solutions now, not excuses." As the family began debating her fate as though she weren't present, suggestions ranging from sending her to distant relatives in the countryside to arrangements with doctors who could solve the problem discreetly. Su Ching placed a protective hand over her stomach. The gesture didn't go unnoticed, and the room fell silent once more. "So it's true then?" her aunt whispered, eyes fixed on Su Ching's still flat abdomen. "You're pregnant?" The confirmation seemed to drain the last hope from her father's expression. He suddenly looked older than his 56 years, shoulders hunched beneath an invisible weight. The family business, a modestly successful construction supply company, had always operated on the foundation of the Su family's good reputation. In their conservative community, this scandal threatened not just social standing, but financial stability for everyone present. "Go to your room," her father finally said, not meeting her eyes. "Stay there until we decide what must be done." Su Ching rose on unsteady legs, dignity somehow intact despite everything. As she turned to leave, something flickered in her tear-filled eyes, not just pain, but a flash of defiance that suggested this story wouldn't follow the expected path of the shamed woman accepting her fate. The family continued their deliberations as she walked slowly toward the hallway, their voices blending into a single condemning chorus. Near the doorway, Su Ching paused, her gaze catching on a newspaper folded on the side table. The business section featured a photograph of a striking man with intense eyes and an inscrutable expression. The headline read, No one noticed Su Ching's slight hesitation as she looked at the photograph, or the almost imperceptible straightening of her shoulders before she continued down the hallway. They were too busy protecting a family honor that had already sacrificed her to preserve it. That newspaper photograph of CEO Ling Xiao Han represented more than just business news. It was the other half of a story Su Ching's family was too blinded by shame to investigate. While they deliberated her fate on worn furniture, the man actually responsible was reviewing acquisition documents worth millions from his penthouse office, a world where consequences could be managed with the right resources. 40 stories above Jiangcheng's bustling streets, Ling Xiao Han sat at a desk carved from a single slab of rare black walnut. The office occupied the entire top floor of Shangja Tower, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a view that reminded him daily of his position, quite literally, above everyone else. The setting sun cast long shadows across the metropolis he'd helped reshape over the last decade, golden light reflecting off the glass facades of buildings that bore his client's name. The desk held only essential items: a crystal paperweight gifted by the mayor, a fountain pen worth more than most people's monthly salary, and a smartphone encased in carbon fiber and titanium. The device alone cost what the Su family might earn in a quarter. Such was the disparity between their worlds. "The Henderson proposal requires immediate attention," said Zhang Wei, Shangjia Group's chief financial officer, sliding a leather portfolio across the desk. 5 other executives stood at a respectful distance, their postures betraying a mix of deference and tension. None sat until Ling Xiao Han gestured toward the chairs surrounding his desk. As they settled in, Ling's executive assistant appeared with a tray of imported water in hand-blown crystal glasses. No one reached for a drink until their CEO had taken his first sip. These subtle power dynamics weren't accidental. They were the carefully cultivated ecosystem of influence that Ling Xiao Han had built around himself. "Henderson wants concessions on the Eastern Development," continued Zhang Wei, his voice carefully neutral. "They're claiming environmental concerns, but our analysts believe they're simply leveraging for better terms." Ling Xiao Han opened the portfolio and began reviewing the documents with practiced efficiency. His eyes moved methodically across pages of financial projections, legal stipulations, and architectural renderings. The project represented a potential 200 million yuan investment, one of many concurrent developments that had earned him the nickname the Architect of New Zhangqiang in business circles. Halfway through the 3rd page, something unexpected happened. Ling Xiao Han paused, his expression momentarily vacant, as if seeing something beyond the documents before him. The executives exchanged glances. This deviation from their CEO's usual laser focus was notable enough to cause concern. "Provenance?" Director Lin, after several seconds of uncomfortable silence. Ling Xiao Han blinked once, his composure returning immediately. "The eastern boundary requires adjustment. Move the residential units back an additional 50 meters from the waterfront." He made a precise notation on the document and continued reading as though nothing unusual had occurred. Director Lin opened his mouth to question the sudden change that would cost millions, then thought better of it and simply nodded. "Of course, sir. I'll have the plans modified immediately." This was how power operated in Lin Xiaohan's world. Not through shouting or dramatic displays of authority, but through the unstated understanding that his decisions, however unexpected, were final. A single notation from him altered the futures of hundreds of workers, dozens of contractors, and thousands of potential residents. The meeting continued with presentations on 3 other major projects, each executive monitoring Ling Xiaohan's micro-expressions with practiced vigilance. When he tapped his index finger twice on the table during a financial projection, the presenter immediately adjusted his approach. When he tilted his head slightly during a marketing strategy overview, the chief marketing officer quickly pivoted to address in unspoken concern. The distinctive ringtone of Lin Xiaohan's private line cut through the presentation. Only 5 people had access to this number: his mother, his personal attorney, his head of security, his doctor, and one other person whose identity he kept private. The executives froze as he reached for the device. "Continue," he instructed them, while glancing at the caller ID. Something indefinable crossed his features. Not quite concern, but a sharpening of attention. He placed the phone face down, without answering. 5 minutes later, when it rang again, Ling Xiao Han stood abruptly. "We're done for today. Leave everything. Wei, implement the changes we discussed on Henderson. Lin, adjust the eastern boundary. Everyone else, proceed as directed." The room emptied within 30 seconds. Executives gathering their materials with practiced efficiency. None questioned why their 3-hour meeting had been cut short after less than an hour. Such was the unwritten protocol of Shangjia Group's highest echelon. When the door closed behind them, Lin Xiaohan finally answered the phone. "Report," he said simply, moving to the window that overlooked the city's central district. In the distance, beyond the gleaming high-rises and commercial developments, lay the older neighborhoods, where families like the Su's had lived for generations. The conversation lasted less than a minute. Ling Xiao Han listened more than he spoke, his reflection in the glass revealing nothing of his thoughts. When it ended, He placed the phone on his desk and remained at the window, hands clasped behind his back, in a posture that had been photographed numerous times for business magazine. After several minutes of contemplation, he pressed the intercom. "Bring me file S1103. His executive assistant appeared moments later with a slim folder, placed it on the desk without comment, and departed. Ling Xiao Han returned to his desk and opened the file. Inside was a collection of newspaper clippings about Su Construction Supplies, a modestly successful family business that had been struggling since the economic downturn. The most recent article detailed their failure to secure a contract for the city's western expansion project, a decision that had been influenced by a single phone call from Shangjia Group's procurement division. Beneath the clippings were surveillance photographs, discrete images taken at public events and locations. They chronicled the Su family's movements over the past 6 months, with special attention to their oldest daughter. Su Ching appeared in most of the images, entering the technical college where she studied architecture, working evening shifts at a high-end catering company, sketching in a public park. Ling Xiao Han studied one particular photograph, longer than the others. Su Ching, serving drinks at a business function 3 months earlier. He remembered nothing of their interaction that night, but the timestamp on the image corresponded with a 12-hour gap in his own memory. A night his security team had attributed to unexpected side effects from a new blood pressure medication. He returned to the window, pressing his palm against the cool glass as he surveyed his domain. Far below, thousands of lives unfolded in patterns dictated by economic and social forces he helped control. Somewhere in that maze of streets and buildings, Su Ching was dealing with the consequences of an encounter neither of them fully remembered. Ling Xian returned to his desk and pressed the intercom again. "Have the car brought around, and tell security to clear my schedule for tomorrow morning." He gathered the photographs of Su Ching and placed them in his personal safe, then took out his phone and opened a secure messaging application. He typed a simple instruction to his most trusted investigator: find out everything about the Su family, especially the daughter. Priority level 1. Complete discretion required. Before leaving, Ling Xiangyang opened one final file on his phone, a candid photograph of Su Ching, taken just a week ago. She was leaving her college building, her expression serious but determined, despite the whispers that had already begun following her on campus. There was something in her posture that caught his attention, a resilience that seemed familiar somehow. As darkness settled over the city, 2 women in the Su household waited for silence before speaking their true intentions. The walls of Su Ching's childhood home had always been thin, but tonight they would reveal secrets that would shatter her last illusion of safety and force her to confront a betrayal more calculated than she could have imagined. Su Ching lay motionless in her narrow bed, the day's humiliation still burning in her chest. Sleep remained elusive as her mind replayed the accusations, the disappointment in her father's eyes, the neighbors' prying glances. The house had finally grown quiet after hours of tense dinner conversation, where her name was mentioned only in whispers. Just as her eyelids began to grow heavy, the soft creak of floorboards in the hallway snapped her back to alertness. "Is she asleep?" The voice belonged to Zhou Huyin Min, her stepmother of 15 years. Though the tone carried none of the maternal warmth she'd performed earlier that day, when she'd patted Su Ching's shoulder before the family gathered to condemn her. "I took her light is off." Suzia's voice was barely above a whisper, but clear enough through the thin wall separating their rooms. "Nobody will hear us now." Su Ching held her breath, instinctively knowing she wasn't meant to witness whatever conversation was about to unfold. The shadows of the 2 women stretched across her wall as they passed her door, moving towards Su Jia's room at the end of the hall. Against her better judgment, Su Ching slipped from beneath her covers and pressed her ear against the wall adjoining Su Jia's bedroom. "This situation with her is perfect timing," Zhou Human said, her voice taking on a calculating edge Su Ching had never heard before. "Your father has been wavering about the company shares. He's sentimental about giving her an equal portion, despite everything I've said about your dedication to the business. Suzia's laugh was cold and unfamiliar. Well, he won't be sentimental now. Not when his precious first daughter has disgraced us all. Su Ching's heart hammered against her ribs. The company shares? Her father had mentioned his intention to divide Su Construction Supplies equally between his daughters when he retired, despite Joe Human's protests that Suzia had shown more interest in the business. But Su Ching had never imagined her stepmother's opposition ran deeper than mere preference. I've already spoken with Attorney Wang, Joe Human continued. He says with the right pressure, your father can be persuaded to transfer Su Ching's inheritance to you entirely. The community shame is the perfect leverage, and I've made sure that shame is inescapable, Suzia replied with unsettling pride. I called every one of Mother's connections yesterday morning, before we even confronted Su Ching. By the time she woke up, half of Jiangcheng had heard some version of the story. Su Ching pressed her hand against her mouth to stifle a gasp. The rumors had preceded the family meeting. Her sister had been spreading her shame before she'd even had a chance to explain herself. The betrayal cut deeper than any public humiliation could. You've always been clever, Joe Human praised, the fondness in her voice a grotesque contrast to her earlier performance of concern for her stepdaughter. But we need to move quickly. Your father might recover from his disappointment if given time to reflect. Men can be infuriatingly forgiving of their daughters. He won't have time to forgive her, Suzia said with quiet confidence. Not when he learns about my connection to Shangjia Group. Su Ching froze, her blood turning to ice at the mention of the company. Shangjia Group, the company led by the man whose photo had been in the newspaper, the man whose name she'd been too ashamed to mention during the family interrogation. Have you told him yet? Joe Human asked, her voice dropping even lower, forcing Su Ching to press closer to the wall. But yet, the timing needs to be perfect. But Ling Xiao Han and I have been meeting for months now. His acquisition of the Western Development Zone puts him in the perfect position to rescue Father's company from bankruptcy, and a marriage connection would seal the arrangement permanent. Marriage connection? Su Ching's vision blurred as the pieces began to align into a horrifying pattern. Suzia and Ling Xiao Han? The same man? Will you announce the engagement? Joe Human asked, practical as always. Soon. His family is traditional, so we've been discreet. But once Su Ching is removed from the inheritance, I'll introduce him to Father as the company's salvation and his future son-in-law. The pregnancy scandal provides the perfect distraction while we finalize the details. Su Ching's legs nearly gave out beneath her. She slid down the wall, her mind racing to process the magnitude of what she was hearing. Suzia had been secretly meeting the CEO of Shangjia Group, the very man who was the father of Su Ching's unborn child. Did Suzia know? Was this elaborate plan crafted with full knowledge of the connection, or was this a cruel coincidence engineered by fate? What if she fights back? Joe Chimin's voice held a note of concern. She's always been stubborn. What resources? Suzia scoffed. Her scholarships will be revoked once the university hears about her condition. No respectable company will hire her, and Father won't support her financially once we convince him to cut her off. She'll be forced to leave Jiangqianko altogether. The systematic dismantling of her future, laid out so coldly by her own sister, should have broken Su Ching completely. Yet something unexpected stirred within her. Not despair, but a quiet burning resolve. And her child? Joe Human asked. There was a pause before Suzia answered. A child born in disgrace has no claim to the Su family name or assets. Our family lawyer confirmed it. The inheritance laws are clear. Su Ching placed her hand protectively over her stomach, feeling a surge of determination stronger than any emotion she'd experienced during the day's public humiliation. This was no longer about just her reputation or future. It was about protecting her child from people who saw them as nothing more than an inconvenient obstacle to wealth. The conversation shifted to logistics. Which relatives would influence her father most effectively? Which community leaders would reinforce the family's decision to disinherit her? which documents needed to be prepared. Su Ching listened until she could bear no more, then silently returned to her bed, her mind racing not with despair, but with nascent plans. Once dawn's first light crept through her window, Su Ching moved with newfound purpose. She slid open the bottom drawer of her desk and removed the false bottom she'd installed years ago. From this hidden compartment, she carefully withdrew a portfolio of architectural designs she'd been developing since her second year of university. Detailed, innovative concepts that her professors had praised as showing exceptional promise. She spread the drawings across her bed: sustainable housing units, community centers, urban renewal projects, each bearing her distinctive vision of spaces that served human needs while honoring traditional aesthetics. These weren't merely student exercises. They were professional quota designs that represented a path forward, independent of her family's business or approval. In the harsh morning light, Su Ching studied her work with new eyes. The talent captured in these pages was real. It was hers, and no family judgment or community scandal could take it away. The irony wasn't lost on her, that while Zhou Qimin and Su Zia plotted to strip away her inheritance, they remained unaware of the true asset she possessed: her own creativity and skill. The black luxury sedan glided to a stop outside the Su family's modest home, its polished surface reflecting the morning sun like an obsidian mirror. Su Ching stood at her bedroom window, fingers pressed against the glass as she watched three men emerge from the vehicle. Even from this distance, she recognized the commanding presence of the man in the center, Ling Xiao Han, whose photograph she had studied in secret just yesterday. Her heart stuttered in her chest as the implications crashed through her mind. Why would the most powerful businessman in Zhangqiang come to their neighborhood, to their doorstep? The doorbell's chime echoed through the house, shattering the morning routine like a stone through glass. Su Ching heard her father's slippers shuffling across the floor, followed by Su Jia's quick footsteps and her stepmother's urgent whispers. She remained frozen by the window, unwilling to face whatever new humiliation awaited. Through the thin walls, she heard her father's startled gasp, followed by his fumbling greeting. "Mr. Ling, what an unexpected honor." Her father's voice carried the tremor of a man suddenly finding himself face to face with power beyond his comprehension. The sound of multiple footsteps entering their home followed measured, deliberate steps that spoke of purpose. Su Ching slipped from her room into the shadowed hallway, positioning herself where she could observe without being seen. The contrast between the visitors and their humble surroundings was jarring. Ling Xian stood in their living room like a hawk among sparrows, his tailored charcoal suit worth more than all the furniture surrounding him. Two security personnel flanked him. Their eyes constantly scanned the room with professional detachment. "Please, sit down. May I offer you tea? Or perhaps coffee?" Her father gestured toward their worn sofa, suddenly conscious of its frayed edges and faded pattern. The man who had thundered condemnations at Su Ching just yesterday now bent with deference, his spine curved in supplication before wealth and influence. Ling Xiao Han shook his head once. "That won't be necessary." His voice carried the quiet authority of someone accustomed to speaking once and being heard. "I've come on a matter of some importance regarding your family." From her vantage point, Su Ching observed the calculated transformation of her stepmother and sister. Zhou Huiman's usual pinched expression had melted into something resembling warmth, while Su Zia smoothed her hair and adjusted her posture to appear more graceful. The performance would have been amusing if not for the undercurrent of tension that electrified the air. "We're honored by your presence," Zhou Huiman said, her voice honey-sweet. "Su Zia has mentioned meeting you at several business functions." At the mention of Su Zia's name, something flickered across Ling Xiaoqian's face, so brief it might have been imagined. He did not acknowledge the comment, instead scanning the room with measured precision. "I believe you have another daughter," he stated, the words landing like quiet thunderclaps in the small space. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Su Ching watched her father's shoulders stiffen, caught between the shame they had cultivated around her and the apparent interest of Jiang Chang's most powerful man. Su Ching is indisposed this morning, her father managed, casting a desperate glance toward his wife. I've come to discuss Su Ching and the child she carries, Ling Xiao Han announced, his voice level but unyielding. Each word fell with the precision of a judge's gavel. The effect was immediate and electric. Su Zia's face drained of color so rapidly that for a moment Su Ching thought she might faint. Zhou Huimin's fingers closed around her daughter's wrist with such force that her knuckles bleached white against her skin. Neither woman spoke, their carefully constructed narrative collapsing around them in real time. I don't understand, her father stammered, looking between Ling Xiao Han and his wife with growing confusion. How do you know my daughter? Su Ching realized this was the moment to step forward. Drawing a deep breath, she emerged from the hallway shadows into the harsh light of scrutiny. 4 pairs of eyes turned toward her, her families filled with confusion and dawning horror. Ling Xiao Han's, with something more complex. The moment their eyes met, something shifted in his expression, a momentary softening around the edges, a recognition that passed between them like a current before his features settled back into their professional mask. That fleeting connection, invisible to everyone else in the room, gave Su Ching courage to stand straighter as she faced the gathering. Mr. Ling, she acknowledged with quiet dignity. She wore simple clothes, a modest blue dress that couldn't hide the slight curve of her stomach, but carried herself with unexpected poise. And Su, he returned, inclining his head slightly, the formal acknowledgement, so at odds with how her family had been treating her, felt like a lifeline thrown across turbulent waters. A heavy silence descended, broken only when Ling Xiao Han turned back to address the family. I believe we should speak frankly, he said. I am responsible for Su Ching's condition. The declaration landed like an earthquake, reshaping the landscape of their understanding in an instant. Zhou Huimin's mouth fell open, her carefully curated facade of maternal concern shattering completely. Su Zia seemed to shrink into herself, her eyes darting between Ling Xiao Han and Su Ching with naked calculation and growing dread. That's impossible, Su Zia finally managed, her voice barely above a whisper. I assure you it is not, Ling Qiang replied without looking at her. His focus remained solely on Su Ching's father, whose expressions cycled through shock, confusion, and something approaching reverence with dizzying speed. And I am here to ensure she and the child are properly cared for. Su Ching watched the transformation happening across her father's face. The same man who had called her selfish, who had mourned his family's honor as if it were a deceased relative. Now his eyes gleamed with new possibilities as he reassessed the situation. The disgrace that had threatened their family name just hours ago was rapidly reconfiguring into an unexpected connection to power and wealth. Of course, her father finally said, his voice unnaturally bright. Family responsibility is important to us all. Perhaps we should discuss this further, in private. Ling Xiao Han nodded once. That would be appropriate. His gaze returned to Su Ching, and for a moment, the careful barrier of his professional demeanor thinned. If you're comfortable with that arrangement, the simple acknowledgement of her agency, absent from her family's treatment of her situation, nearly brought tears to Su Ching's eyes. She nodded, unable to trust her voice. As her father led Ling Xiao Han toward his study, Su Ching caught the venomous glare from her stepmother, the betrayed expression on Su Jia's face. Their perfectly orchestrated plan to manipulate her shame for their benefit had been upended in less than 10 minutes by a man whose presence commanded respect without effort. Watching them disappear into the study, Su Ching remained in the living room, conscious of the calculating glances from her stepmother and sister. The sudden reversal of fortune had transformed her overnight from family disgrace to unexpected asset. She understood with perfect clarity that their judgment had never been about morality or family honor. It had always been about control and opportunity. The study door closed with a soft click that echoed like finality through the house. Su Ching's family believed they now understood everything. The powerful man, the pregnant girl, the simple story of seduction and consequence. How wrong they were. The truth behind that night contained fragments missing from both participants' memories, pieces of a puzzle neither had fully assembled until now. Inside the study, Ling Xiao gestured for Su Ching to sit across from him. The leather chair creaked under her weight, a sound that seemed thunderous in the strained silence. Outside, her family pressed against the door, straining to hear conversations never meant for their ears. "I imagine you have questions," Ling Xiao Han began, his voice softer than it had been in the living room. Gone was the commanding presence that had stunned her family into silence. In its place sat a man wrestling with his own confusion, his gaze fixed on a point somewhere beyond her shoulder. "You said you're responsible," Su Ching said, her hands protectively covering her stomach. "But that's not the whole truth, is it?" His eyes met hers, and for the first time since his arrival, vulnerability flashed across his features. "I remember meeting you at the hotel function 3 months ago. You were serving drinks, but after that," he shook his head slowly. "Fragments, impressions, not a complete memory." Su Ching felt her breath catch. His words mirrored her own experience, the hazy recollections that had haunted her since that night. "I was working the private reception on the 20th floor, she said, each word carefully chosen. "You seemed disoriented. Others didn't notice, but I could tell something was wrong." Images flickered through her mind, like an old film reel with missing frames. The crystal glasses on her serving tray, the weight of Lin Xiaoqian's arm as she helped him toward the elevator, his security detail mysteriously absent, the strange taste in her own mouth after finishing a half-empty champagne flute during her break. "I was drugged," he said simply, watching her reaction carefully. "My security team found traces of benzodiazepines in my system the next morning, enough to impair judgment and memory, not enough to cause unconsciousness." He leaned forward, hands clasped together. Did you drink anything that night?" "The staff isn't supposed to," Su Ching admitted, "but one of the guests left a nearly full glass. I was tired, had been on my feet for hours." She swallowed hard. "It tasted strange, but I thought it was just expensive champagne." Understanding dawned in his eyes. The complete picture began forming between them. Two people, unintentionally impaired, making decisions neither would have made in their right minds. "I remember helping you to your car," she continued. "You couldn't find your driver. You offered to drop me at the employee entrance since it was raining. After that," she shook her head. "Impressions, sensations, not a complete story." The traditional narrative of power and seduction dissolved in the light of their shared confusion. This was not the wealthy man taking advantage, nor the calculating server girl seeking opportunity. They had both been pawns in someone else's game. "You did help me to my car," he confirmed. "My driver was called away by someone claiming to be from my office. Security footage later showed him arguing with someone outside. By the time he returned, my car was gone." Ling Xianfier's fingers tapped against the armrest, a rare display of agitation. "We were in the car together for nearly 2 hours before I was dropped at my residence. You were taken home afterward, according to the Jeep." Su Ching fought back tears. "So, neither of us fully remembers what happened between us." "No," he said quietly, "but the consequences are undeniable." The room fell silent as they both absorbed the implications. Someone had deliberately targeted Ling Xiao Han that night, perhaps for blackmail, perhaps for business leverage. Su Ching had simply been the unwitting variable, the server who noticed his distress when nobody else did. "Who would want to drug you?" she finally asked. "And why?" "I've made enemies," he said, the understatement hanging heavy between them. The timing coincided with the Henderson negotiations. The Western Development Project had just been announced. Any number of competitors stood to gain if I were compromised. He hesitated. "What I don't understand is how you became involved. Su Ching thought of her sister's whispered conversations, the connections she claimed to have cultivated. A terrible suspicion began forming in her mind. Perhaps I wasn't random, she said slowly. Perhaps someone knew exactly who I was. Before he could respond, she continued. Why are you here now? It's been 3 months. You could have handled this quietly through lawyers or intermediaries. His expression shifted, confidence replacing vulnerability. Because I've spent those 3 months investigating what happened. Because, despite the circumstances, I am responsible for your current situation. His gaze dropped to her stomach. And because I wanted to see for myself who you really are. And what have you discovered? She asked, lifting her chin. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. A scholarship student with exceptional grades in architectural design. Someone who works 3 jobs to support herself through university. Someone who hasn't spent a cent of the money I had deposited in your account when I discovered your identity. Su Ching's eyes widened. What money? 200,000 yuan. Transferred the moment my investigation confirmed your pregnancy. You never touched it. I didn't know, she said truthfully. I would have returned it, which is precisely why I'm here in person, he replied. You're not what I expected, Su Ching. The power dynamic between them shifted again. For all his wealth and influence, he was discovering that she couldn't be bought or manipulated. For all her vulnerability and shame, she was finding strength in her integrity. I don't expect you to forgive me, or even trust me, Ling Xiao Han said, his voice dropping to nearly a whisper. But I won't allow you to face this alone. When we were both victims that night, Su Ching studied his face, searching for deception and finding none. Instead, she saw something unexpected. Respect, not pity or obligation, but genuine respect. What exactly are you proposing? She asked. Financial support? Without question. The best medical care. Protection from gossip and scandal. Your continued education. He listed these things matter-of-factly, as though discussing a business arrangement. Beyond that, I leave to your discretion. Su Ching thought of her family outside, already calculating how to leverage this unexpected connection. She thought of her stepmother's schemes and her sister's betrayal. She thought of the child growing inside her, a child created in circumstances neither parent had fully chosen. I will accept your help, she said finally, the words surprising them both. But not as charity, not as your obligation or burden. She straightened in her chair, finding strength she hadn't known she possessed. We will make decisions together, as equals. I won't be bought, controlled, or hidden away. Surprise flickered across his face, followed by something she couldn't quite name. Perhaps admiration, perhaps curiosity. Whatever plans he had walked in with were being rewritten in real time. As equals, he repeated, testing the concept. Then, with the decisiveness that had built his empire, he extended his hand. Agreed. That handshake 5 years ago transformed into something neither could have predicted. A small figure with eyes too knowing for her age. Su Yao Yao sat perfectly still at the edge of the playground, her gaze following the movements of children who raced and tumbled around her with an intensity that made other parents uncomfortable. They called her the strange one, in hushed tones, when they thought no one could hear. But Su Ching heard. She always heard the whispers that followed her daughter. From her bench beneath a gnarled maple tree, Su Ching watched Yao Yao's head tilt slightly left. A gesture so subtle, only a mother would notice. 3 seconds later, a boy racing across the playground veered precisely in that direction. Su Ching held her breath. This had been happening with increasing frequency over the past few months. These moments of impossible anticipation. Yao Yao slid from her perch on the concrete ledge and moved with deliberate steps toward the play structure. A boy, perhaps 6 or 7, raced around the corner, laughing over his shoulder at friends. Su Ching saw it before it happened. His trajectory, the wet patch from earlier rain, the inevitable fall. But Yao Yao saw it sooner. Her small arm extended, catching the boy's elbow before his foot even touched the slippery surface. Careful, Yao Yao said, her voice soft but firm. It's wet there. The boy blinked at her, confused by the strange girl who'd grabbed him for no apparent reason. Then he looked down, noticing the puddle for the first time. "Oh," he said, then ran off without a word of thanks, casting one wary glance back at Yao Yao. Su Ching felt her chest tighten. She could no longer pretend this was simply a child's intuition or lucky guesses. Yao Yao's guesses, she knew. The incident last week with the wrapped birthday gift had removed any lingering doubt. Yao Yao had carefully rearranged the tissue paper inside the box before opening it, making space for the porcelain doll she hadn't yet seen. When Su Ching asked how she knew, Yao Yao had simply replied, "You kept picturing how it would look in my hand." A young mother on a nearby bench gathered her things hastily when Yao Yao approached her son. Su Ching recognized the woman, Liu Wei, whose husband worked for a competitor of Ling Xiao Han's. The gossip about Su Ching's circumstances had faded over the years, but it never truly disappeared, merely transforming into new whispers about her unusual daughter. "Mama," Yao Yao said, appearing suddenly at Su Ching's side. "That lady thinks I'm weird. Her mind is very loud." Su Ching smoothed her daughter's perfectly straight hair, so like her father's in texture, but with Su Ching's deep chestnut color. "Remember what we practiced?" she asked gently. "When the thoughts get too loud?" Yao Yao nodded solemnly. Su Ching raised her hand in their private signal, thumb pressed to middle finger, forming a small circle. "Breathe and focus only on my thoughts." Yao Yao mirrored the gesture, her small features relaxing as she found the calm center of her mother's mind amid the playground chaos. It had taken them nearly a year to develop this technique, after Su Ching had found 4-year-old Yao Yao curled in her closet, hands pressed over her ears, crying that everyone was shouting, though the apartment had been silent. Su Ching had crouched beside her, whispering, "Focus on my voice, only my voice," until the child's breathing slowed. Later that night, Yao Yao had recited, word for word, the argument Su Ching had mentally rehearsed with her boss earlier that day. An argument she had never spoken aloud. "Better?" Su Ching asked now. Yao Yao nodded, though her eyes retained that distant look that meant she was still sifting through the thoughts of others, unable to fully block them out. "That boy doesn't like me," she said, pointing toward the child she'd prevented from falling. "He thinks I'm a ghost girl." Su Ching felt the familiar ache of maternal protectiveness clash with her practical nature. How do you prepare a child for a world that fears what it doesn't understand? How do you teach secrets and discretion to someone who instinctively connects with others at their most vulnerable level? "And everyone understands people who are different," Su Ching said carefully. They'd had variations of this conversation dozens of times, but Yao Yao needed the repetition, the constant reminder that her gift required caution. "That's why we have our special rules. Never tell what people are thinking," Yao Yao recited dutifully. "Never answer questions before they're asked. Never show that I know things I shouldn't know." She sighed, her small shoulders drooping. "But it's hard, Mama. Their thoughts are so loud and mine feels so quiet in comparison." Su Ching gathered her daughter closer, feeling the delicate bird-like bones beneath her winter coat. She sometimes wondered if Yao Yao's unusual mind had developed at the expense of her physical strength. The child was small for her age, with a translucent quality to her skin that made the blue veins at her temples visible when she concentrated too hard. "I know it's difficult," Su Ching said, "but you're getting better at controlling it. Remember last week at the market? You didn't respond to Mrs. Zhang's thoughts about her cat at all." A smile flickered across Yao Yao's face. "But her cat had kittens under her bed, and she doesn't know yet. Can I tell her next time?" "No, sweetheart. That's exactly what we're talking about. You can't." "Is my father coming today?" Yao Yao interrupted, her expression suddenly alert. Su Ching froze. She hadn't checked her phone in hours, had deliberately left it in her bag to focus on this rare afternoon with her daughter. Ling Xiao Han's visits were carefully scheduled around his business commitments, typically arranged at least a week in advance, with confirmation messages exchanged the day before. There had been no such arrangement for today. Do you ask that? Su Ching kept her voice neutral, though her heart had begun to race. Yao Yao tilted her head, listening to something beyond her mother's words. You haven't checked your phone yet. He sent a message 20 minutes ago. Her expression brightened. He finished his meeting with the American investors early. He wants to take us to dinner at the new place, with the fish tanks on the floor. Su Ching reached for her bag with trembling fingers, extracting her phone to find exactly the message Yao Yao had described, sent 23 minutes earlier. The restaurant detail, a newly opened seafood establishment with aquariums built into the floor, had not been mentioned in any previous conversation with Yao Yao. Mother and daughter locked eyes in a moment of wordless understanding. This was no lucky guess, no overheard conversation. The distance between Ling Xiao Han's office and this playground spanned half the city. Yao Yao, Su Ching said carefully. Can you hear your father's thoughts, even when he's not with us? The little girl nodded, as if this were the most natural thing in the world. Not all the time, just when he's thinking about us very strongly. She leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper, though no one was near enough to hear. He thinks about us all the time, Mama, even when he's in big meetings with important people. Su Ching felt a curious warmth spread through her chest at this revelation. In 5 years, Ling Xiao Han had never failed in his financial responsibilities or in his scheduled visits with Yao Yao. He had been unfailingly respectful of Su Ching's independence in her career, but his emotional landscape remained largely uncharted territory, his true feelings hidden behind the reserved exterior he presented to the world. What does he think about? Su Ching asked, before she could stop herself. Yao Yao's face grew serious, her eyes taking on that uncanny adult quality that sometimes made Su Ching forget she was only 5. He worries that I'll inherit his loneliness, and he wonders if you'll ever forgive him for that night, even though he knows it wasn't really his fault. She paused, considering. Also, he thinks you look prettiest when you wear blue. The words about blue lingered in Su Ching's mind as she smoothed down her navy dress, standing beside her architectural model, while judges circled like elegant sharks. 5 years had transformed the whispered-about young woman into someone whose work demanded attention. The sustainable community center before her, a harmonious blend of traditional elements and cutting-edge ecological design, represented more than a competition. It embodied her journey from society's margins to this moment of potential vindication. Her fingers traced the contours of the miniature bamboo garden that formed the heart of her design. The judges approached, their expressions professionally neutral, but eyes betray interest. The head judge, Professor Wei, leaned forward to examine the intricate system of rainwater collection channels that doubled as decorative elements. Fascinating integration of form and function, he murmured, making a note on his clipboard. Su Ching nodded, maintaining her composure despite the flutter in her stomach. Across the exhibition hall, conversations paused as Ling Xiao Han entered, his presence commanding attention without effort. He acknowledged her with a slight inclination of his head, before positioning himself at a calculated distance, close enough to signal support, far enough to ensure her achievement remained entirely her own. Their eyes met briefly over the heads of the crowd, a silent communication honed through years of navigating their unconventional connection. In that glance lived 1,000 unspoken words about sacrifice, growth, and a mutual respect neither had anticipated when fate first entangled their lives. A camera flash pulled Su Ching back to the present as journalists documented the competition. She caught fragments of whispered conversations. That's her, the one who never would have expected such sophisticated work from someone with her background. Heard she turned down 3 firms to start her own company. The journey to this moment had been anything but linear. Memories flooded back. Nights hunched over drafting tables while Yao Yao slept in a makeshift bed beside her desk. The sting of rejection letters citing concerns about company image that everyone knew translated to, "We don't hire women with your history." The day she rented a tiny office above a noodle shop and hung a modest sign, "Su Innovations, Architectural solutions. Her first clients came hesitantly, drawn by desperation and budget constraints rather than faith in her vision. A community garden expansion the larger firms deemed too small to bother with. A family-owned restoration renovation no one else would touch after a fire left the owners nearly bankrupt. Each project completed with excellence gradually shifted perception, building a portfolio that eventually spoke louder than gossip. "Su," called Professor Wei, interrupting her reflections. "Would you explain your philosophy behind this central courtyard design? It's rather unconventional." Su Ching stepped forward, finding her voice. "Traditional courtyards historically separated people by class and gender. I've reimagined this space to eliminate hierarchies while preserving cultural elements that connect us to our heritage." She indicated the various entry points, each accessible without steps or barriers. Architecture shapes human interaction. When we design spaces that welcome everyone, we begin healing divisions that exist beyond these walls. The judges exchanged glances, clearly struck by the concept's elegance and the subtle challenge it posed to conventions. Su Ching continued her explanation, warming to her subject as she pointed out how natural light penetrated even the innermost rooms, how elderly residents could navigate without strain, how children found safe spaces to play while remaining within sight of caregivers. From across the room, she spotted Yao Yao slipping through the crowd, her small hand clasped in the protective grip of Su Ching's former university professor, Mei Lin, the only faculty member who had maintained contact after the scandal broke. Yao Yao's eyes, so disconcertingly knowing, surveyed the room before finding her mother's face. The child's smile conveyed absolute certainty, as though the competition results were already known to her. Su Ching suppressed a smile, wondering what thoughts her daughter might be picking up from the judges' minds. They had established boundaries about Yao Yao's unique abilities. Never use them for personal gain, being the most important rule. But Su Ching sometimes wondered if her 5-year-old interpreted these guidelines as flexibly. Another judge approached, this one frowning slightly at the materials list. "Your budget constraints are ambitious. How would you ensure quality with these financial limitations?" "By eliminating waste," Su Ching replied without hesitation. "Traditional construction methods discard nearly 30% of materials. My approach incorporates precise measurements and community participation in certain phases, reducing labor costs while creating stakeholder investment." She indicated the modular components that could be prefabricated locally. Every element serves multiple functions, which maximizes value without sacrificing integrity. The judge nodded slowly, making another notation. In that moment, Suzie glimpsed Suzie on the periphery of the gathering, her expression a complex mixture of resentment and reluctant curiosity. Their eyes met briefly before Suzie turned away, disappearing into the crowd. The announcement came an hour later, after judges had completed their final deliberations. The exhibition hall grew quiet as Professor Wei approached the microphone. Su Ching felt Yao Yao's small hand slip into hers, tiny fingers surprisingly warm against her suddenly cold palm. "This year's entries demonstrated exceptional vision and technical skill," Professor Wei began. "Before announcing our decision, I'd like to emphasize that the winning design will be constructed in the Eastern District, serving communities that have historically lacked access to cultural and recreational spaces." Su Ching kept her expression neutral, despite her racing heart. The Eastern District, where she had grown up, where her father still lived, where whispers had once driven her away. The committee has selected a design that not only addresses practical needs, but reimagines how public spaces can heal social divides. The Zhangcheng Architectural Innovation Award goes to, the pause stretched like an eternity, Su Ching, for Confluence, a community center without barriers. The applause began hesitantly, then gained momentum. Su Ching bent to whisper in Yao Yao's ear, "Stay with Auntie Mei," before making her way to the stage. Each step felt simultaneously dreamlike and hyper-real, faces blurring around her, while the sensation of her shoes against the floor remained intensely present. As she accepted the Crystal Award, Su Ching scanned the audience. Former classmates, who had once crossed hallways to avoid her proximity, now applauded. Community leaders who had rejected her early proposals now nodded with approval. Ling Xiao Han watched from the back, his typically impassive face softened with something that might have been pride. The microphone awaited her response. Su Ching placed the award carefully on the podium and took a breath. Architecture isn't merely about buildings. It's about creating spaces where human dignity can flourish, she began, her voice finding strength with each word. This design draws from my understanding that exclusion damages not just those kept outside, but the community itself, which loses the contributions of those it marginalizes. She paused, noting how completely silent the room had become. 5 years ago, I experienced what it means to stand outside society's acceptance. That perspective revealed to me how our physical spaces reinforce invisible barriers. A club fluence creates a center where different lives can intersect with respect, where no one stands in judgment of another's worthiness to belong. Her gaze found Yao Yao, whose small face beamed with unmistakable pride. Behind her stood Ling Xiao Han, the man who had chosen responsibility when society expected nothing of him, who had supported her independence rather than attempting to control her path to redemption. The triumphant moment shattered like crystal against marble when an uninvited guest arrived at the celebration reception. As glasses clinked and congratulations flowed, Su Ching couldn't shake the feeling that something remained unresolved, a shadow lingering at the edges of her hard-won success. The victory that should have marked her complete redemption was about to collide with a 5-year-old secret that even Yao Yao, with her unusual perceptiveness, hadn't detected. The reception hall gleamed with soft lighting that highlighted the architectural renderings of Su Ching's award-winning design. Business associates moved through the space with appreciative nods, many of the same people who had once averted their eyes when she entered the room. Now they sought her attention, eager to associate themselves with her rising reputation. Ling Xiao Han stood nearby, maintaining a respectful distance, while occasionally catching her eye with a look that conveyed genuine pride rather than mere obligation. Yao Yao twirled in her navy dress, a miniature version of her mother's elegance, pausing occasionally to study the faces around her with that penetrating gaze that seemed to absorb more than just visual information. For once, the three of them appeared as what they truly were, a family connected by more than circumstance, sharing a moment of hard-earned harmony. "Your glass is empty," Ling Xiao said, stepping closer and reaching for Su Ching's champagne flute. The gesture was simple, but carried the weight of 5 years of careful navigation, of finding their way from strangers bound by scandal to something neither had anticipated: mutual respect. Su Ching was about to respond when she noticed Yao Yao suddenly freeze, her small body tensing as her gaze fixed on something across the room. Following her daughter's line of sight, Su Chia hovering at the periphery of the celebration, eyes burning with an emotion that transcended simple jealousy. "She shouldn't be here," Yao Yao whispered, pressing herself against her mother's side. "Her thoughts are like angry wasps." Ling Xiao Han turned, his posture shifting subtly from relaxed to alert, as he recognized the woman who had once presented herself as a potential match for him before everything changed. "I'll have security escort her out," he said quietly, but Su Ching placed a hand on his arm. She replied, "Let's see what she wants." As if sensing their awareness, Suzia began moving toward them with practiced grace, her timing calculated for maximum effect. She waited until a cluster of business reporters had gathered nearby, their digital recorders and cameras poised to capture any noteworthy moment from the evening's celebration. "Congratulations, sister," Suzia said, her voice carrying just enough to draw attention, without seeming deliberate. "Such an accomplishment for someone with your background." Su Ching maintained her composure, years of rebuilding her life having fortified her against such thinly veiled barbs. "Thank you for coming, Suzia. It's been some time. I brought you something." Suzia continued, extending a cream-colored envelope with manicured fingers. I thought everyone should know the truth about that night. The envelope hung between them like a suspended threat. Around them, conversations faltered as attention shifted to this unexpected confrontation. Ling Xiao Han moved closer to Su Ching, his expression neutral, but his eyes calculating every possible outcome of this encounter. With steady hands that betrayed none of her inner turmoil, Su Ching accepted the envelope. She opened it slowly, aware of the eyes upon her, including those of her daughter, who pressed against her side with unusual stillness. Inside, she found photographs, documents, and a handwritten confession that confirmed what she had long suspected but never been able to prove. The evidence was methodically arranged: bank transfers to hotel staff, chemical analysis of the specific benzodiazepine compound, and most damning of all, Suzia's own timeline of events, detailing how she had orchestrated the night that had nearly destroyed Su Ching's life. You arranged it all, Su Ching said, her voice soft but clear enough for those nearest to hear. You had us both drugged. You made sure I was assigned to that particular function. You even calculated the dosage to ensure we would be impaired but conscious. Suzia's smile turned brittle as she realized her moment of triumph wasn't unfolding as planned. I merely helped fate along. You were always in the way. The talented daughter, the one with potential. I simply created an opportunity for you to fall, as you deserved to. Yao Yao's small hand tightened around her mother's, and she looked up with eyes that seemed to reflect knowledge beyond her years. She's scared of you, Mama, she whispered loudly enough for Suzia to hear. She always has been. The truth hung in the air between them. Suzia had engineered the entire situation, from ensuring Su Ching would be working that night, to arranging for both her and Ling Xiao Han to be drugged. The plan had been meticulously designed to disgrace Su Ching, while positioning Suzia to comfort the powerful CEO, who would have no memory of what transpired. What she hadn't anticipated was Ling Xiao Han's sense of responsibility, or that their encounter would result in a child. Ling Xiao Han's expression transformed as he processed the evidence, his features hardening from shock to a cold fury that few had witnessed and fewer had survived in business. His voice, when he finally spoke, carried the precision of a man accustomed to measuring every word. 5 years, he said, each syllable weighted with controlled anger. 5 years of manipulation and lies. You arranged for us to be drugged, potentially endangering our lives, certainly violating our autonomy, all to advance yourself. His gaze shifted momentarily to Yao Yao, the daughter who might never have existed had Suzia's plan worked as intended. Something flickered across his face, the realization of how close he had come to never knowing this child, who had, against all odds, become central to his life. Your calculations were impressive, he continued, his business mind assessing the scope of her scheme, even as his personal fury simmered beneath the surface. But fundamentally flawed, you failed to account for human complexity, for the possibility that responsibility might outweigh convenience. That connection might prove stronger than scandal. Suzia's composure began to crumble as she realized her revelation wasn't creating the scandal she had intended. Instead of destroying Su Ching's moment of triumph, she had inadvertently provided the final piece of a puzzle that had haunted them for years. The reporters nearby weren't capturing Su Ching's humiliation, but rather witnessing her dignity in the face of this revelation. You don't understand, Suzia hissed, desperation creeping into her voice. She was nothing, a scholarship student, from the wrong background. You were meant for someone who could stand beside you properly, someone who understood your world. Someone like you? Su Ching asked quietly. You're right about one thing. I didn't understand his world then, but neither did you understand him. Cameras flashed as Su Ching carefully returned the documents to the envelope and handed it to Ling Xiao Han. When she spoke again, her voice carried the strength of someone who had rebuilt herself from the ground up. Your plan failed because you underestimated us both, she said simply. You saw only what you wanted to see, My vulnerability, his status, you never saw what mattered. Suzia's careful facade completely collapsed then, rage and humiliation modeling her features, as she realized the trap she had laid for Su Ching had become her own undoing. Without another word, she turned and pushed through the gathered observers, her hasty departure marked by whispers and the occasional flash of cameras. In her wake, Su Ching found herself standing with Ling Xiao Han on one side and Yao Yao on the other. A family constellation formed through circumstances that defied conventional narratives. They had not chosen their beginning, but they had chosen every step since, building something authentic from the wreckage of Suzia's scheme. The envelope sat on Su Ching's desk like a living thing, its crisp edges and official laboratory seal seeming to pulse with consequence. Outside her window, the city continued its evening rhythm, lights flickering on in countless windows, the distant hum of traffic rising and falling. But in the quiet sanctuary of her study, time had slowed to an unbearable crawl. For 3 days, she had left the envelope untouched, as if delaying the moment might somehow alter what lay inside. Xia's parting words at the celebration had accomplished exactly what they were designed to do. Like poison dropped into clear water, her insinuations about Yao Yao's paternity had spread tendrils of doubt through the certainty Su Ching and Ling Xiao Han had built. "Are you absolutely sure?" Xia had whispered as security escorted her away. "Men like him are targets. Who knows who else might have been in his bed that week?" Su Ching traced her finger along the envelope's edge, remembering the conversation with Ling Xiao Han afterward. They had agreed immediately, without hesitation, not because either harbored genuine doubt, but because they refused to allow Suzia's final attack to linger between them, unaddressed. The test would be a formality, nothing more. Scientific certainty to silence speculation forever. Yet now, alone with the results, Su Ching found herself paralyzed. Why did a paper validation matter when every instinct told her the truth? When Yao Yao's mannerisms mirrored her father's in 100 small ways science could never quantify. She closed her eyes, recalling how her daughter held her chopsticks with the same precise angle as Ling Xiao Han, an oddly formal grip neither Su Ching nor anyone in her family had ever used. How Yao Yao would pause before answering difficult questions, tilting her head slightly to the right, the exact gesture Ling Xiao Han employed during challenging negotiation. Last week, Su Ching had watched them both, absently rubbing their left thumbs against their forefingers, while deep in thought, completely unaware they were moving in perfect synchronicity. The soft ping of her phone broke her reverie. Ling Xiao Han would arrive in 20 minutes. She had promised to open the results when they were together, but suddenly the waiting felt unbearable. Su Ching reached for the envelope, her fingers unusually clumsy as she broke the seal. Inside was a single page of clinical precision, columns of data, scientific terminology, and highlighted conclusions. Su Ching scanned past the technical jargon to the summary statement at the bottom, her breath catching as she read the words. The weight of society's judgment had forced them to this moment, seeking validation through chemical analysis and genetic markers for something as fundamental as the identity of their child. Blood tests and laboratory technicians determining what should have been unquestionable. The irony wasn't lost on Su Ching that 5 years ago, a different kind of test had confirmed her pregnancy, sending her life spiraling into chaos. Now another test would either cement their unconventional family or introduce a complication none of them had anticipated. The sound of a car pulling up outside drew her attention to the window. Ling Xiao Han stepped out, pausing to button his suit jacket before walking toward the entrance of her building. Even from this distance, Su Ching could see the tension in his shoulders, the carefully controlled expression that betrayed his concern. For a man accustomed to directing the course of multi-million yuan deals with a single word, this moment represented perhaps the rarest form of powerlessness. No amount of wealth or influence could determine what those test results would say. Su Ching wondered if he had slept at all last night. Her apartment door opened minutes later, Ling Xiao Han stood in the entryway, immaculately dressed as always, but with shadows beneath his eyes that confirmed her suspicions about his restless night. For a moment, neither spoke. "I opened it," Su Ching said finally, holding the paper in her hand. Something flickered across his face. Surprise, perhaps concern that she hadn't waited, but also unmistakable fear. This man, who commanded boardrooms and transformed skylines, looked suddenly vulnerable in a way few had ever witnessed. "I needed to know," she added, watching as he carefully closed the door behind him. And the single word contained volumes. Questions about their future, about the child they both loved, about whether science would confirm what their hearts had already settled. Su Ching stood, crossing the room until she stood before him. "She has always been yours," she said simply, extending the paper toward him. The transformation was subtle but profound. The tightness around his eyes softened. His shoulders relaxed imperceptibly. He took the paper, scanning the contents with the thoroughness he applied to all important documents. But Su Ching could see he was already absorbing what mattered most. "I never truly doubted," he said quietly, still studying the results. "But Suzia's accusations were a final attempt to wound us both," Su Ching finished, "to make us question something fundamental, to make us question ourselves," he corrected, folding the paper carefully, "to introduce uncertainty where we had finally found certainty." He placed the results on a nearby table with deliberate care. "These results change nothing about how I feel. They merely confirm what I have known since I first saw Yao Yao." The measured footsteps approaching from the hallway announced their daughter's presence before she appeared in the doorway. Yao Yao stood watching them, hair slightly disheveled from her afternoon nap, her expression containing that peculiar wisdom that sometimes made Su Ching forget she was only 5 years old. "Did the paper finally tell you what I already knew?" she asked, her directness startling them both. Ling Xiao Han knelt to meet her at eye level, a gesture of respect he showed few others. "What did you know, Yao Yao?" The child's gaze shifted between her parents, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "That you're my father. In here." She pressed a small hand against her chest. "I've always heard your thoughts clearest of anyone's, even when you're far away." Su Ching watched as Ling Xiao Han absorbed this declaration, the complexity of emotions crossing his face: wonder at their daughter's perception, relief at the confirmation of their connection, and perhaps a trace of concern about the extent of her abilities. "The test says the same thing," he confirmed gently. Yao Yao nodded, unsurprised. "Can we have dinner now? I'm hungry." The simplicity of her response broke the tension. Su Ching laughed, feeling lighter than she had in days. "Yes, we can have dinner. Your father brought ingredients for dumplings." As they moved toward the kitchen, Su Ching paused to look back at the test results, still resting on the table. A paper that had loomed so large in her imagination now seemed inconsequential. They had needed it for the world, perhaps, for legal documentation, for school records, for the tangible proof society required, but not for themselves. The family they had built existed beyond blood tests and DNA markers. It had been formed through choice rather than convention, strengthened through challenges rather than tradition. Suzia's final attempt to undermine them had instead solidified what they already knew to be true. Truth may eventually surface, but some relationships remain broken long after lies are exposed. The striking community center represented Su Ching's professional triumph, its innovative design already garnering national attention. Yet, as she prepared to address the gathered crowd, her carefully applied confidence couldn't hide how her gaze kept returning to the single, unoccupied seat reserved for the man who had once declared her dead to him. The Eastern District gleamed with anticipation as sunlight streamed through the bamboo and streamed latticework of the Confluence Community Center. Dignitaries, journalists, and local residents filled the outdoor amphitheater where the ribbon-cutting ceremony would soon begin. Su Ching stood at the podium, her emerald cupiao A deliberate choice. The color of new beginnings. Despite her composed exterior, she couldn't help but notice the conspicuous gap in the front row, where her father should have been sitting. 5 years had passed since the DNA results confirmed what she had always known. Yet that scientific validation had done little to repair the relationship with her father. The truth of Suzia's manipulation had only widened the gulf between them. His pride, wounded by his own rush to judgment, prevented him from acknowledging how thoroughly he had failed his daughter. Every invitation she'd sent over the past 8 months, since winning the design competition, had gone unanswered, including the hand-delivered note requesting his presence today. "We'll begin in 5 minutes," whispered the event coordinator, gently touching Su Ching's elbow. She nodded, maintaining her dignity despite the disappointment throbbing beneath her ribs. From the second row, Yao Yao Yao, now 6, and dressed in a miniature version of her mother's outfit, offered an encouraging smile that contained wisdom beyond her years. Beside her sat Ling Xiao Han, his usual imposing business demeanor softened as he watched his daughter comfort her mother with just a look. Su Ching tapped the microphone gently, and the crowd settled into attentive silence. "Architecture," she began, her voice clear and steady, "is never merely about buildings. It's about the spaces between people and how we choose to fill them." The metaphor was not lost on those who knew her story, how she had transformed exclusion into a foundation for creation. As she continued her speech, detailing how the community center's design eliminated traditional barriers while honoring cultural heritage, a ripple of movement at the entrance caught her attention. The crowd shifted slightly, heads turning toward the disturbance, and Su Ching's words momentarily faltered as she recognized the figure standing hesitantly at the threshold, her father looking smaller somehow, more vulnerable than she remembered. For a heartbeat, their eyes met across the distance. Then, with a barely perceptible nod, he began making his way down the center aisle. The weight of their estrangement was visible in his measured steps, in the slight stoop of shoulders that had once been proudly squared against the world. The audience, sensing the significance of the moment, parted to create a path for him. "The most challenging spaces to bridge," Su Ching continued, finding her rhythm again as her father approached the empty seat, "are not physical, but emotional. Architecture at its best teaches us that even the strongest structures require flexibility to endure." Her words took on deeper resonance as her father lowered himself into the chair, his hands folded tightly in his lap, his expression a complex mixture of shame and determination. The remainder of Su Ching's speech wove together technical specifications and philosophical insights, explaining how the community center's design intentionally created gathering spaces where different social groups would naturally intersect. "Notice how the central atrium draws people inward while simultaneously opening to all 4 directions," she explained, gesturing toward the building's heart. "This creates a space where no one stands above another, where conversations happen naturally between people who might otherwise never meet." What remained unspoken, but understood by those closest to her, was how profoundly her own experiences had shaped this vision. Each architectural element reflected a piece of her journey, the transparent walls representing truth finally revealed, the supporting beams disguised as decorative elements symbolizing strength that needn't announce itself, the garden spaces designed specifically to heal. And as Su Ching concluded her remarks and the ceremonial ribbon was cut, applause filled the air. She watched as Ling Xiao Han guided Yao Yao through the crowd toward her, their unlikely family unit navigating the social current with practiced ease. Officials and journalists surrounded them, eager for comments and photographs of the architect whose personal story of resilience had become inseparable from her professional reputation. Throughout the following hour of handshakes and congratulations, Su Ching maintained an awareness of her father's presence at the periphery of the gathering. He neither approached nor departed, instead moving quietly through the exhibition spaces, studying the architectural models and concept sketches displayed along the walls. His attention seemed particularly caught by a series of early drafts showing the center's evolution, evidence of Su Ching's persistence through multiple redesigns. The crowd eventually dispersed as guests moved deeper into the building for the reception. Su Ching found herself alone in the East Garden, a private contemplation space she had specifically designed for difficult conversations. The curved bench offered both proximity and space, positioned beneath a canopy of wisteria that filtered the afternoon light. She sat, breathing in the scent of new plantings and polished wood, when she heard footsteps approaching on the stone path. Her father stood before her, the years etched into his face like weathering on a once solid foundation. "This place," he said finally, his voice rough with emotion. "It's remarkable, like nothing I've ever seen." The words were simple, but represented his first acknowledgement of her achievements since the scandal had erupted. "Thank you," Su Ching replied, neither cold nor welcoming, maintaining the careful equilibrium she had cultivated over years of disappointment. "I judged without understanding," he continued after a lengthy pause, his eyes fixed on the intricate latticework overhead, rather than meeting her gaze. "I failed you when you needed me most." The admission came with visible difficulty, each word extracted from beneath layers of pride and regret. Su Ching studied him, noting how his hands trembled slightly as they gripped each other. The anger she had carried for so long shifted subtly within her chest, not disappearing, but transforming into something more complex. She thought of Yao Yao, who possessed the ability to hear others' thoughts, yet still practiced compassion toward those whose minds revealed prejudice or fear. "There's a bench in the garden, designed for conversations that need time and space," Su Ching said finally, gesturing to where she sat. "Perhaps we could start there." It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was an opening, an architectural solution to an emotional problem. Her father lowered himself onto the bench, leaving appropriate distance between them. The silence stretched, not uncomfortably, but necessarily, as they both contemplated the path forward. In the distance, Su Ching could see Yao Yao watching them through one of the transparent walls, her small face serious, with understanding beyond her years. "I designed this space," Su Ching explained, "so that people could sit side by side rather than face to face. Sometimes direct confrontation makes truth harder to speak." She ran her hand along the smooth curve of the bench. "The wisteria above will eventually grow to form a natural ceiling, creating the feeling of protection without confinement." Her father nodded, following her gaze upward. "You always saw things differently, even as a child," he said softly. "I should have recognized that as strength rather than defiance." The apology contained within this observation was imperfect, but sincere. Su Ching felt something shift between them. Foundations laid in crisis can support structures we never imagined possible. 3 years later, as twilight painted the community center's garden in shades of amber and rose, Su Ching sat on the same bench where her father had offered his first fragile apology, but now she shared it with the two people who had transformed her greatest humiliation into an unexpected path to fulfillment. The garden bench, deliberately designed for side-by-side conversations, held the three figures in a comfortable silence that would have seemed impossible years before. Yao Yao, now 7, nestled between her parents, occasionally closing her eyes as if processing the jumble of thoughts around her. Su Ching noticed how her daughter's breathing had developed a pattern, 3 deep breaths, whenever the mental noise became overwhelming, a technique they had refined together over the past year. "The lighting turned out exactly as I hoped," Su Ching said softly, breaking the silence as she gazed at the lanterns illuminating the stone path. "The architect in me can't help but critique my own work, even now." Ling Xiao Han's lips curved into a subtle smile. "You've always seen possibilities others miss." His hand rested on the bench just centimeters from hers, close enough to feel warmth, but maintaining the respectful distance that had characterized their unique relationship. "The Western District Development Committee visited yesterday. They want to commission a series of community spaces based on this design." Su Ching felt a familiar rush of satisfaction. Her professional recognition had come gradually, each project building upon the last, her reputation now standing on the merit of her work, rather than the whispers of her past. "The irony isn't lost on me," she said. "The scandal that was meant to diminish me, forced me to discover what I could truly build." Yao Yao looked up suddenly. "Dad is going to ask you something important," she announced with the matter-of-fact tone that still occasionally startled them both. Though they had grown accustomed to her perceptiveness, her ability to pluck thoughts from their minds before they were spoken aloud remained somewhat unsettling. Ling Xiao Han's expression shifted, a rare crack in his usually composed demeanor. "Yao Yao, we've discussed the importance of letting people express their own thoughts in their own time, but you've been thinking about asking for 3 weeks, 2 days, and..." She paused, calculating, 14 hours. She folded her arms with the certainty only a child could maintain when faced with adult hesitation. Su Ching exchanged a glance with Ling Xiao Han over their daughter's head, a silent communication they had perfected through years of co-parenting. Their journey from strangers linked by an orchestrated encounter to partners raising a remarkable child had been anything but conventional. The transformation had been gradual, business-like arrangements giving way to mutual respect, then genuine trust, and eventually something neither had anticipated. "Perhaps your father would like to walk with me to the reflection pool," Su Ching suggested gently to Yao Yao. "You could practice that concentration exercise Professor Lin taught you last week, counting the koi fish without getting distracted by anyone else's thoughts." Yao Yao considered this for a moment before nodding. "There are 17 fish. I counted yesterday." She stood, brushing invisible dust from her dress, in a gesture so reminiscent of Lin Chao Qingxian that Su Ching felt a familiar tug at her heart. "But I'll practice anyway. Professor Lin says repetition builds neural pathways." As their daughter skipped toward the pond, Su Ching and Ling Xiao Han rose together, their steps falling into natural synchronicity as they walked the meandering path through bamboo groves. The city skyline glittered in the distance, the Shangjia Tower prominent among the silhouettes, a visual reminder of how far they had come. "She grows more perceptive every day," Lin Xian exclaimed. "The specialists at the research center believe her abilities may continue to develop well into adolescence. Yet she's learning to channel it productively now," Su Ching replied. "The burden seems lighter since she started working with Professor Lin." She paused at a curved section of the path, where the design intentionally slowed visitors to appreciate the view. "I never imagined that night at the hotel would lead to..." She gestured at the expansive garden, the community center beyond, and finally toward their daughter. Ling Xiao Han's expression softened. 7 years ago, when my security team showed me the footage from the hotel camera, you helping me to my car when I could barely stand, I was consumed with finding who had drugged me, who had orchestrated such a breach in my security." He shook his head. "I never anticipated finding a family instead." "We're not exactly a conventional family," Su Ching reminded him. "Perhaps that's why it works." He turned to face her directly, his usual commanding presence tempered by a vulnerability few ever witnessed. "These past 7 years, I've evolved from a man who measured success in acquisitions and expansions to one who rushes from board meetings to attend school performances." Su Ching smiled at the memory of the powerful CEO sitting uncomfortably on a tiny chair at Yao Yao's first piano recital, his security team looking equally out of place among the other parents. "You've become quite adept at balancing both worlds. Because of you." His directness caught her off guard. "You never allowed me to simply be the benefactor, the distant provider. You demanded I be present, not just financially, but emotionally. You challenged me in ways no business competitor ever could." The evening breeze carried the scent of jasmine as they resumed walking, their path curving back toward the central garden. Ahead, they could see Yao Yaoi sitting cross-legged by the koi pond, her eyes closed in concentration. "I've been considering our arrangement," Lin Xiao Han said carefully, each word measured. Our co-parenting agreement has served its purpose, but as Yao Yao grows, perhaps we should consider a more permanent structure. Su Ching felt her pulse quicken. They had successfully navigated shared parenthood while maintaining separate lives. She with her growing architectural firm, he with his expanding business empire. Their relationship had evolved from awkward formality to genuine partnership, but they had carefully avoided defining what existed between them beyond Yao Yao. "Are you proposing what I think you're proposing?" she asked, her architect's precision demanding clarity, even as her heart raced. Ling Xiao Han reached into his pocket and withdrew a small box. "7 years ago, I took responsibility for a situation neither of us chose. Today, I'm asking if you would consider choosing me, not out of obligation or circumstance, but because of what we've built together." Su Ching looked at the box, surprised to find herself not surprised at all. Something had been shifting between them for years. "Open it," he said quietly. Inside wasn't a ring, but a miniature architectural model, a perfect replica of a house she had sketched years ago during a late-night conversation about ideal living spaces. She had forgotten the drawing entirely, but apparently he had not. "I remembered every detail," he explained. "I had it created exactly as you designed it. The property overlooking West Lake is already secured, waiting for your final adjustments to the plans." Su Ching touched the model gently, moved by the thoughtfulness behind the gesture. This was not about possession or convention, but about truly seeing her, understanding that her creativity was the core of her being. "I'm not asking you to be my wife in the traditional sense," he continued. "I'm asking if we might design something more intentional for our future, together." Su Ching closed the box carefully, considering her response. "I've never followed the expected path," she finally said. "Neither have you, especially since Yao Yao came into our lives. Perhaps instead of fitting ourselves into society's definition of family, we could design our relationship like I would a building, with a strong foundation, room to grow, and shaped by what we need rather than what others expect." Ling Xiao Han's expression reflected understanding. "Not a yes or no, but a proposal of your own." "Exactly," Su Ching smiled. "Let's draft the blueprints together, test the structural integrity, ensure it can withstand whatever pressures come. Marriage could be one element, but not the defining feature." From the koi pond, Yao Yao suddenly looked up, a wide smile spreading across her face as she caught the drift of their thoughts. Without a word, she rose and ran toward them, inserting herself between them and taking both their hands in hers. As the sun set over the garden bench, where 3 lives had intertwined against all odds, the true essence of Su Ching's journey revealed itself. Society had been quick to cast her aside, a woman who dared exist beyond the narrow confines of expectation. Yet her story wasn't one of forgiveness, granted by those who judged her, but of power reclaimed through her own hand. In the elegant lines of her architectural designs, in the knowing eyes of her extraordinary daughter, in the relationship built on her own terms, Su Ching had transformed humiliation into triumph. Her dignity wasn't borrowed or bestowed, but forged in resistance to those who sought to define her worth.